The metallic tang of ozone and scorched plastic clung to the air, an acrid welcome mat laid out for me the moment the security door hissed open. I stepped over the threshold, my boots crunching on shattered glass and pulverized drywall. The silence that followed the initial blast must have been deafening, but now, only the low hum of emergency ventilation units disturbed the stillness, attempting a futile cleansing of the devastation. "Looks like a hell of an accident, Reed," the lead detective said, his voice a low rumble beside me. He gestured broadly at the scene with a gloved hand, encompassing the ruin. "Or a very determined suicide. Bioengineer Thorne was working on something big, something volatile, from what we hear." I didn't reply, my gaze already sweeping past the detective's hand, past the gaping hole where a reinforced wall once stood, towards the heart of the destruction. Dr. Aris Thorne's state-of-the-art research facility, a fortress of intellect and cutting-edge technology, was now a mangled testament to uncontrolled energy. Twisted metal beams jutted like broken bones from the ceiling. Equipment racks lay toppled, their intricate circuits exposed and melted into grotesque sculptures. Every surface was coated in a fine, gray ash, a ghostly powder that muffled the vibrant colors I knew these labs once held. "He was alone in here," the detective continued, consults his notepad. "Security logs confirm no external breach. Internal cameras were knocked out by the initial event. No one else was on this level at the time of the explosion. Looks pretty cut and dry." Cut and dry. That phrase always grated on me. Nothing in my line of work was ever truly cut and dry. Every scene, no matter how straightforward it appeared, held layers, nuances, contradictions waiting to be unearthed. My eyes narrowed, already searching for them. The facility itself was an architectural marvel, designed for maximum containment and minimal human interaction. Tiered levels of access, biometric scanners, reinforced everything. Thorne had built his kingdom here, dedicated to his groundbreaking and apparently dangerous research. And now, his kingdom lay in ruins. I moved deeper into the debris field, my headlamp cutting through the gloom, illuminating specific points of interest. My kit bag felt heavy on my shoulder, a familiar comfort. The initial responders had done their job, securing the perimeter, documenting the broad strokes. My job was to paint the finer details, to read the story the destruction told. The body was, predictably, at the epicenter. What remained of Dr. Aris Thorne lay slumped amidst the wreckage of his primary containment chamber, or what was left of it. The blast had been catastrophic, reducing much of his immediate surroundings to slag. His form was barely recognizable, contorted and fused to the scorched floor plating. The sheer force had been immense, consistent with a major energy release. I knelt, ignoring the metallic tang that seemed to cling to my nostrils, and began my methodical examination. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something subtly sweet and artificial, like burnt sugar mixed with industrial solvent. I registered it, filed it away. The containment chamber's remnants were particularly telling. What appeared to be a pressure vessel, heavily reinforced, had ruptured with explosive force. Its outer shell was peeled back like a flower in reverse bloom, shrapnel embedded in the far walls. This was the source, the ignition point. Or so it seemed. I worked slowly, my gloved fingers brushing aside detritus, my eyes scanning every millimeter of the landscape of destruction. The heat had been intense, charring everything, but the patterns of burning were what interested me most. Fire tells a story of its origin, its fuel, its spread. This fire had been violent, localized, and then extinguished by the sheer lack of oxygen or the depletion of its immediate fuel source. Most of the charring radiated outwards from the primary vessel, as expected. But then I saw it. Tucked away beneath a partially collapsed workstation, shielded from the direct blast by a heavy-duty power conduit, was a section of floor plating. It was scorched, yes, but the pattern was off. Instead of the diffuse, outward-spreading burn marks consistent with the main explosion, this patch, no larger than my palm, exhibited a distinct, almost focused thermal signature. A perfect, symmetrical circle of intense heat, not radiating outwards, but concentrated inward, as if a pinpoint flame had been held there for an extended period, or a specific, directed energy burst. The metal wasn't just blackened, it was subtly pitted, almost etched. And within that etched circle, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a single-minute fragment. I pulled out my magnification loupe, adjusting the lens. The fragment was iridescent, a sliver of something crystalline, no bigger than a grain of sand, embedded deep within the melted surface of the floor plate. It shimmered with an unnatural, almost cold light, reflecting the beam of my headlamp. It wasn't metal. It wasn't glass from the lab. It wasn't any material I recognized from Thorne's known equipment schematics, which I'd reviewed on the drive over. This wasn't consistent. The main explosion was chaotic, widespread. This small, precise burn, with its embedded foreign material, suggested something entirely different. It spoke of control, of intent, of a localized application of energy that didn't fit the narrative of a runaway reaction or a haphazard suicide. I felt a familiar tension coil in my gut. The detective's cut and dry assessment evaporated, replaced by the ghost of a question. This tiny fragment, once processed, would join countless others in the steel lockers down in the police department basement holding forensic samples, each a silent testament to a story waiting to be told. My eyes lifted from the minute detail, sweeping across the vast, chaotic scene once more. Thorne's research was world-changing, they said. And someone, it seemed, had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure he didn't change it any further. The game, I realized, had just begun. The air in the secure room hummed, a low, persistent thrum that did little to soothe the tension in my shoulders. The preliminary report from the pathologist lay open, pages filled with precise, dispassionate observations, yet each line felt like a fresh cut. The bioengineer's body, read. It's complicated. The pathologist, a woman with sharp eyes and a perpetually weary sigh, had delivered her findings an hour ago. She'd laid out the primary cause of death, massive internal trauma consistent with a high-energy thermal event. The lab explosion theory, reinforced by the structural damage upstairs, still held the surface. But beneath that surface, the details gnawed at me. I traced a finger over a schematic drawing of Thorne's torso. The burn patterns, for instance. They weren't uniformly distributed as one would expect from a single, catastrophic blast originating from a specific point. Instead, there were areas of extreme, almost surgical scorching, particularly around the chest and head, juxtaposed with surprisingly intact tissue elsewhere. It was as if the force had been highly directional, focused, rather than emanating outwards. And the unusual burn pattern you mentioned? I'd asked the pathologist. He had adjusted her glasses, peering at me. Precisely. The thermal damage to the internal organs suggests a localized, intense energy release within the immediate vicinity of the body, rather than from a general lab explosion. Imagine a small, contained detonation, but with immense power. A personal device? Something Thorne was holding? But the lab's security footage, what little we'd recovered before the system fried, showed nothing in his hands in the moments before the flash. Then came the real anomaly, buried in the pathologist's addendum. I found it now, highlighted in yellow microscopic particulate matter, non-organic, consistent with a synthetic mineral compound. Not identified in any standard lab inventory or geological database for the immediate region. I leaned closer, my breath catching. A unique, non-lab-related trace element. This was it. The thread I'd been looking for. The compound was described as a crystalline structure, barely visible even under high magnification, embedded in the outer layers of Thorne's epidermal tissue, particularly on his hands and forearms. Not deep, suggesting recent contact, perhaps within minutes or hours of his death. It wasn't something that would have been blasted onto him from the explosion, it was on him already. My suspicions solidified into a hard, cold certainty. This wasn't an accident. Thorne hadn't just miscalculated. Someone had been with him, or had handled him, or he had handled something that carried this unique signature. This wasn't about a catastrophic lab event, it was about precision, about a deliberate act designed to look like chaos. I left the sterile environment of the basement and headed upstairs, the pathologist's words echoing. The preliminary findings were enough to elevate this from a tragic accident to a full-blown investigation. The lead detective, a man named Miller who usually preferred open and shut cases, grunted a confirmation. All right, Reed. You got something. Who's first on your list? Anyone with a motive, Miller. And Thorne, from what I'm gathering, wasn't exactly a team player. The first interview was with the rival scientist, a man known for his competitive streak and a history of public spats with Thorne over intellectual property. He sat across from me in the interview room, his hands clasped tightly on the table, a nervous tic working at his jaw. Thorne was intense, the rival scientist began, his voice tight. Brilliant, yes, but ruthless. He'd cut you out, steal your ideas, if he thought it would advance his own work. My research, for instance, in biophotonics, a closely related field. He was always trying to get access to my data, claiming it was for collaborative synergy. He scoffed, a bitter sound. Synergy to him meant feeding off others. Did you have any recent disputes? I pressed, watching his eyes. They darted, then settled on a point beyond my shoulder. A few weeks ago, at the sector conference, he admitted, his voice dropping. He publicly discredited a key finding of mine, implying I'd rushed my methodology. Said it was untested and irresponsible. It cost me a significant grant. His gaze hardened, meeting mine. Did I wish him ill? Professionally, yes. Did I kill him? Absolutely not. I was nowhere near that lab. He had an alibi, a flight manifest placing him several states away. But the animosity was palpable. Next was the former research assistant, a young woman named Maya, who had worked under Thorne for 3 years before abruptly leaving 6 months prior. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed, but there was a fierce spark in them. Thorne promised me co-authorship on the quantum entanglement project, she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It was my algorithm that finally cracked the energy efficiency problem. I worked 18-hour days, sacrificed everything. Then, when the patent applications went through, my name wasn't on them. He claimed my contribution was administrative support. Her lips thinned into a hard line. He took everything. My work, my reputation. I left because I couldn't stand to be in the same room as him. Did you confront him? I asked. Of course. Multiple times. He just laughed. Said I was replaceable. Said my ideas were just raw material for his genius. She paused, taking a ragged breath. I wanted to see him pay for what he did. But I didn't kill him. I've been working at a startup across town since I left. My colleagues can vouch for my whereabouts. Her alibi also seemed to hold, at least for the day of the incident. Two individuals, both with clear, compelling motives fueled by Thorne's cutthroat ambition and secrecy. Both vehemently denied involvement, and both presented alibis that, on the surface, appeared solid. But the unique mineral compound on Thorne's body lingered in my mind. It was a detail that neither the rival scientist nor the former research assistant could explain. It was a detail that screamed outside influence, a deliberate footprint left by someone who understood how to stage an accident. And it was a detail that was about to pull me much deeper into Thorne's world than I had ever anticipated. Maya's words echoed in the cruiser's confined space, a raw, bitter confession of betrayal and resentment. He just laughed. Said I was replaceable. Her alibi, however, seemed to check out. A startup across town, a witness who could place her there, engrossed in her own research. It didn't clear her of motive, but it put distance between her and the fatal incident. Still, the depth of her anger lingered, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I spent the next few hours immersed in the digital debris of Dr. Thorne's life, specifically the encrypted drives recovered from his lab. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, unforgiving glare on my screens, illuminating the complex architecture of Thorne's data. This wasn't just a simple server farm, it was a digital fortress, mirroring the physical security of his research facility. Accessing Thorne's core project files was like peeling back layers of an onion, each one protected by increasingly sophisticated algorithms. The lead digital forensics analyst, a quiet man who rarely spoke above a whisper, had managed to crack the primary encryption after a 16-hour brute force attack. What we found inside was a sprawling network of data related to advanced genetic sequencing. Project names like Genesis strain and regenerative vector hinted at the scope. The potential applications, even to my layman's understanding, were staggering: global health breakthroughs, or, disturbingly, something far more destructive. The sheer computational power required for this work was immense, suggesting a level of funding and infrastructure few private individuals could command. As I navigated through directories, a peculiar anomaly caught my eye. A series of access logs, deep within a subdirectory labeled Project Chimera, showed a flurry of activity in the days leading up to Thorne's death. Not just read access, but write and delete commands. The timestamps were precise, indicating a session that started late one night and concluded just before dawn. The anomaly wasn't just the timing, but the signature of the access itself. It wasn't Thorne's usual login. It was a ghost, a proxy IP address routed through a chain of servers that ended in a dead digital alley. Someone had been inside, meticulously sifting through critical files. Then came the true discovery, the one that made the hairs on my arms prickle. A section of the Chimera project, specifically files detailing the experimental gene sequences and their synthesis protocols, had been subjected to a sophisticated data manipulation. It wasn't a simple deletion. It was a targeted overwrite, a digital shredding process designed to render recovery impossible. Yet, the ghost of the original data remained, a faint echo picked up by advanced forensic tools. And tucked away, almost perfectly hidden within the metadata of a seemingly innocuous diagnostic log, was a fragment. A single, 7-character string, a partial file name that didn't match anything else in the directory. It was like a breadcrumb, deliberately left, or perhaps accidentally overlooked. An attempted wipe, yes, but not a perfect one. This wasn't the work of a panicked amateur, it was a deliberate, surgical strike. Someone had tried to erase specific evidence, or perhaps, to steal it. And the fact that it was so recent, so close to Thorne's demise, screamed volumes. My mind raced. Was Thorne trying to hide something himself, and the killer merely finished the job? The implications were unsettling. I picked up the phone and called Maya. I need to ask you a few more questions about Thorne's recent behavior. A long pause. I could hear the faint murmur of background noise, a distant siren. He was different, Mr. Reed. More agitated. Like he was always looking over his shoulder. Can you elaborate? What made you think that? I pushed, my gaze still fixed on the fragmented data string on my screen. He started locking everything. Not just the lab, but his office, even his personal storage unit. He changed his passwords every week. Said someone was trying to get in his head, trying to steal his thoughts. Her voice was barely audible now, laced with a fear that wasn't just about Thorne, but about something else, something she wasn't saying. Did he mention anyone specifically? Any rivals, former colleagues, anyone he suspected? Another pause, longer this time. He was paranoid, Mr. Genuinely paranoid. He started keeping a small, encrypted drive with him at all times, never letting it out of his sight. Said it contained the truth, something he needed to protect. Did he ever explain what was on this drive? I asked, a fresh wave of tension coiling in my gut. No. He just clutched it, like a security blanket. The last time I saw it, he had it in his hand, right before the incident. My eyes darted back to my screen, to the remnants of the attempted data wipe. A physical drive, clutched in his hand. If it contained the truth, and someone had tried to digitally shred specific project files, then that drive could be the missing piece. And if it was with him at the time of the explosion, they had gone to extreme lengths to bury them. The question now was, had they succeeded? And where was that small, encrypted drive? Maya's words, sharp with the memory of betrayal, had echoed in the cruiser's confined space. He just laughed. Said I was replaceable. Said my ideas were just raw material for his genius. Her voice, edged with humiliation, had been convincing. Her alibi, however, seemed too porous. A vague timeline, a distant location, no corroborating witnesses beyond a fleeting mention of a crowded cafe. It wasn't enough to dismiss her, but it certainly wasn't enough to hold her. The anger was real, the motive clear, but the means and opportunity remained elusive. My gut told me there was more to Thorne's demise than a spurned colleague's rage. The microscopic burn pattern, the unusual residue I'd found near the primary blast zone, these were the threads that kept snagging my attention, pulling me away from the obvious narrative. A catastrophic lab accident, a suicide, a simple murder of passion. None of it quite fit the precision I'd observed. I needed hard data, something undeniable. That meant a deeper dive into the trace evidence. The hum of the analytical equipment was a familiar lullaby. I set up the sample, a minute speck scraped from the blast-damaged floor, onto the stage of the high-resolution mass spectrometer. Its robotic armward, positioning the laser. I adjusted the focus, my eyes glued to the screen, watching the digital readout. The initial scans had been inconclusive, a jumble of common elements, combustion byproducts. But I was looking for the anomaly, the outlier. Hours bled into one another, the rhythmic clicks and whirs of the machinery filling the silence. My shoulders ached from leaning over the console, but I ignored it. Then, a spike. A distinct, unmistakable pattern emerged on the spectral graph, a complex chain of atoms that didn't match any known organic compound or common industrial material in our extensive database. My breath hitched. I zoomed in, running cross-reference after cross-reference, comparing the signature against specialized libraries. The system churned, sifting through millions of data points. The answer finally flashed on the screen, stark and definitive: a rare, synthetic polymer. Not just any polymer, but one specifically engineered for extreme durability and heat resistance, typically employed in high-end industrial applications. I saw mentions of specialized aerospace components, deep-sea exploration equipment, and advanced manufacturing robotics. This wasn't something you'd find in a bioengineering lab, certainly not in the quantities implied by the residue, even microscopic. It was designed to withstand incredible stresses, to protect, to encase. This trace element wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's research. It was foreign. It suggested an external factor, something introduced to the scene. The implications were immediate and stark. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This wasn't a personal vendetta. This pointed to something far larger, far more calculated. High-end industrial applications meant high-end industrial players. Corporations. And one name immediately sprang to mind, a titan in the field, a conglomerate known for its aggressive pursuit of cutting-edge technology, Omnicorp. They had funded a significant portion of Thorne's research, a fact I'd noted in the initial background checks but had dismissed as standard corporate sponsorship. Now, it screamed red. I spent the next hour cross-referencing Omnicorp's publicly available patents and product lines. While nothing explicitly matched the polymer's signature, I found several patents related to advanced composite materials and specialized coatings, all boasting proprietary synthetic formulations. It was a thin lead, but it was the only one that truly made sense. My next move was clear. I arranged an interview with Omnicorp's liaison to Thorne's project, a man named Aris Thorne, no relation to the deceased. He'd been quick to point out in the initial phone call, with a practiced, almost too friendly chuckle. The interview room was sparse, just a metal table and 3 chairs. The liaison, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, entered with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Unfortunate matter? I watched him carefully, noting the way his gaze flitted around the room before settling back on me, a little too fixed. We've uncovered some trace evidence at the research facility," I stated, keeping my tone neutral. "A synthetic polymer, highly specialized, not typical for a bioengineering lab. Our preliminary findings suggest it's consistent with materials used in high-end industrial applications." His smile didn't waver, but a flicker of something, surprise? Calculation? Crossed his features before he regained control. "Oh. That's interesting." Dr. Thorne was, as you know, a brilliant mind. His work often pushed boundaries. Perhaps it was a new material he was experimenting with? For a structural component, perhaps? He leaned forward, an air of earnest concern. "Omnicorp, of course, encourages innovation. We provide Dr. Thorne with a wide array of resources, access to our own materials science divisions. It's entirely plausible." Plausible, I conceded, but unlikely. This particular polymer has a very distinct signature, one that doesn't align with any of Dr. Thorne's published or even unpublished research notes we've reviewed. It also appears to have been present before the explosion, not as a result of it. His eyebrows rose slightly. Before? Well, that's certainly a wrinkle. But again, investigator, Dr. Thorne was a maverick. He kept many things close to the vest. It's not unheard of for a researcher of his caliber to work on parallel projects, perhaps even for other entities, or for personal exploration. Omnicorp had a very hands-off approach, respecting his genius. He paused, then added, "We truly valued our partnership. It's a great loss to the scientific community. To us, financially speaking, of course." "And what about Omnicorp's own proprietary materials?" I pressed. "Do you have any polymers with similar properties? Perhaps the exact signature we've identified, in your inventory or production?" He chuckled softly, a practiced sound. "Investigator, Omnicorp has thousands of proprietary materials. Our R&D department is vast. To cross-reference every single one for a similar signature would be a monumental task. But I assure you, if we had any knowledge of Dr. Thorne using our materials in a way that would lead to this, we would absolutely cooperate. We are fully committed to assisting your investigation." He spread his hands, palms up, in a gesture of open honesty that felt entirely rehearsed. "Anything you need, just ask. We'll provide whatever we can, within the bounds of corporate confidentiality, of course." His overly cooperative demeanor, the eagerness to offer assistance while simultaneously erecting invisible walls of plausibility and confidentiality, only solidified my suspicions. He was a master of deflection, a corporate shield. This was a carefully constructed deception, and the rare polymer was the first thread leading directly to the architects. The web of connections was starting to reveal itself, and it stretched far beyond the confines of Thorne's lab. I bent over a workstation, the microscopic sliver of polymer from Thorne's lab secured on a slide beneath the lens. My breath hitched as I adjusted the focus, the image resulting into a complex, multi-layered structure unlike anything I'd seen in standard industrial applications. This wasn't just a sealant or a casing, it was engineered, deliberately crafted. My initial analysis suggested a unique molecular signature, a fingerprint that, if traced, could lead me directly to its origin. I spent another hour cross-referencing databases, running spectral analyses. The corporate representative's smooth denials still grated, his insistence on the accidental nature of Thorne's demise ringing hollow in my ears. He'd spoken of proprietary research and sensitive data as if those phrases were incantations against scrutiny. But this polymer, this tiny, resilient fragment, whispered a different story. It was a material designed for extreme conditions, for containing something volatile, or perhaps, for withstanding something catastrophic. Leaving the building, the late afternoon sun hit me with an unwelcome glare. My mind was still dissecting the polymer's unique crystalline structure when the screech of tires ripped through the urban din. The driver gave a brief, dismissive wave, an almost imperceptible flick of the wrist, before accelerating away, merging seamlessly into traffic. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. It was too close, too deliberate for an ordinary lapse in attention. My gut clenched. Not an accident. A message. I tossed my keys onto the desk, the ring clattering against a stack of unfiled reports. My eyes swept the room, a practice scan for anything amiss. The window was latched, the door secure. But then I saw it. My old, leather-bound notebook, where I jotted down initial theories and observations, lay open on the corner of my desk. I always kept it closed, its spine facing the wall. A subtle detail, easily dismissed. Too easily. I walked over, my movements slow and deliberate. The pages were undisturbed, but the subtle shift in its position, the almost imperceptible opening, confirmed it. Someone had been in my space. They hadn't taken anything obvious, hadn't left any glaring signs of forced entry. They wanted me to know they'd been there. They were watching. It was Maya. Can you meet me? Please. I need to talk. Somewhere. I met her at a small, unassuming cafe on the edge of the financial district, a place anonymous enough to offer a semblance of privacy. She sat hunched over a lukewarm cup of tea, her eyes wide and darting, betraying a fear that went beyond grief. His hands trembled as he clutched the ceramic mug, steam curling around his pale face. I can't take this anymore, Reed, he began, his voice hoarse, barely above a murmur. The company. They're saying it was an accident, or something worse, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I leaned forward, my own voice low. What do you know, Maya? She took a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. A few weeks before Thorne died. I was working late, trying to finalize some reports. It was after midnight. The lab was supposed to be completely locked down, only Thorne or a senior director with specific clearance could access it after hours. She paused, swallowing hard. But I saw someone. A silhouette, mostly. Tall, broad shoulders. They were entering Thorne's lab. Not through the main entrance. The service access tunnel, the one that leads to the restricted equipment bay. My mind raced, connecting her words to the corporate representative's carefully constructed narrative, to the subtle breach of my office, to the near miss in traffic. Did you recognize them? She shook her head, a desperate tremor running through her. No. They had a keycard, though. I saw the flash of green light on the reader. I thought it was just Thorne, maybe testing something, being secretive as usual. He often worked odd hours. But now. Her voice broke. Now I think it wasn't him. It was someone else. An unauthorized individual, accessing a high-security lab after hours, weeks before a catastrophic accident. The unique polymer, designed for an unknown purpose. The corporate stonewalling. My own escalating accidents. Why didn't you say anything before, Maya? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. I was scared, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. Thorne was very protective of his work and the company. They don't like questions. I thought I was just imagining things, or seeing something I shouldn't have. But after you started asking about the lab's security, about the discrepancies, I realized I wasn't imagining it. And then, today, the corporate representative, he pulled me aside. He asked me if I'd seen anything unusual. He was menacing. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was an active campaign of intimidation. Someone had used the service tunnel, someone with a keycard, someone who knew the lab's intricacies. And they were still out there, actively trying to shut me down. The polymer, that tiny, engineered fragment, was the key. And the closer I got to tracing its source, the more dangerous my investigation would become. I was no longer just piecing together a puzzle, I was in a game, and the other player had just shown their hand. The cold resolve that had settled in me after the service tunnel incident was a fuel, burning away any trace of fatigue. I needed answers, and the digital ghost of Thorne's lab was where I'd find them. The air here was cool, dry, and tasted faintly of ozone and disinfectant. Rows of labeled evidence lockers lined the walls, silent witnesses to countless past investigations. My temporary workstation, tucked into a corner, was a tangle of cables and screens, connecting me directly to the captured data from Thorne's facility. I started with the lab's environmental control system logs. These were the digital heartbeat of the operation, recording everything from air pressure to gas concentrations, temperature, and humidity. Thousands of entries per minute, a ceaseless, meticulous record. Sifting through it felt like searching for a single irregular beat in a symphony played by a million instruments. I focused on the hours leading up to the incident, then expanded my window, looking for any deviation, however minor, from Thorne's established protocols. His research, as I'd learned from his meticulous notes, was extremely sensitive to atmospheric conditions. My fingers flew across the keyboard, scrolling, filtering, cross-referencing. The raw data was dense, but patterns began to emerge. Most fluctuations were within expected parameters for a high-security research environment. But then, a subtle anomaly snagged my attention. A brief, almost imperceptible dip in the oxygen saturation levels, followed by an equally quick correction, occurred approximately 45 minutes before the catastrophic event. It was so minute, so fleeting, that the system's own error logs had marked it as a non-critical transient, a blip. Any other investigator might have dismissed it as a sensor hiccup. But I knew Thorne's work. I knew its inherent instability if specific conditions were not perfectly maintained. This wasn't a glitch. It was too precise. I immediately pulled up the lab's internal access logs and security camera feeds for that. Same time window. The cameras showed nothing unusual. Thorne was alone, engrossed in his work. No unauthorized entries. No system alerts. Yet, the oxygen dip persisted in the logs. Then, I found it. A single, encrypted command, originating from an internal network IP address, briefly overrode the atmospheric regulators. The timing of this command precisely matched the oxygen dip. The system had restored itself so quickly, it barely registered. This was stage 1. A subtle, destabilizing act. My focus sharpened. If the atmospheric controls had been manipulated, what else? I moved to the equipment logs, specifically those for the bespoke apparatus Thorne was using for his final project. The data here was even more complex, a matrix of energy inputs, material integrity readouts, and reaction rates. It took hours of painstaking analysis, comparing the recorded data against Thorne's own simulated stress tests and operational guidelines. I found it there too. Just moments after the atmospheric correction, a sudden, localized power surge to the central experimental chamber. Again, brief. Again, quickly suppressed by the system's failsafes. But the effect was not. The log showed a cascade of microfractures in the containment field, quickly sealing, but not before a critical threshold was crossed. The system recorded it as an unexpected energy fluctuation, a common enough occurrence in experimental physics to be overlooked. But it wasn't unexpected. It was stage 2. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. The momentary dip in oxygen had weakened the structural integrity of Thorne's experimental reagents or the initial reaction itself, making it acutely vulnerable. The subsequent power surge, precisely timed, acted as a trigger. It wasn't enough to cause an immediate explosion, but it was enough to initiate a runaway reaction, slowly building, until it reached critical mass. The system, fighting to correct the anomalies, was already compromised, trying to stabilize an experiment that had been deliberately pushed past its point of no return. The resulting catastrophic failure, the fire, the structural damage, it all perfectly mimicked an accident. A brilliant, tragic miscalculation on Thorne's part, but it wasn't. It was a meticulously engineered sequence, a multi-stage manipulation designed to appear accidental. The perpetrator hadn't just broken into the lab, they had infiltrated its very nervous system, understood its delicate balance, and then weaponized Thorne's own research against him. This pointed to someone with an intimate, encyclopedic knowledge of Thorne's specific protocols, his unique experimental setup, and the bespoke environmental and security systems that governed his lab. This wasn't a generic attack. This was a surgical strike, tailored to exploit the precise vulnerabilities of Thorne's most sensitive work. My grip tightened on the mouse. The previous chapter's intimidation attempt now made chilling sense. This wasn't just murder, it was an intellectual assassination, executed with a level of sophistication that bordered on genius. The person behind this wasn't just a killer, they were a ghost in the machine, and they were still out there, actively trying to bury their tracks in anyone who got too close. I was dealing with someone brilliant, methodical, and profoundly dangerous. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the rows of evidence lockers and my own cluttered workstation. On the scarred laminate desk before me sat Thorne's primary research workstation, its sleek housing a stark contrast to the gritty environment. I'd already pulled every accessible data log, every experiment record, every communication file. The initial assessment, the one the lead investigator seemed eager to accept, painted a picture of a brilliant mind pushing boundaries, perhaps too far. Or, the more cynical interpretation, a deliberate act of self-destruction to prevent his research from falling into the wrong hands. Both theories accounted for the surface. Evidence, the localized, intense thermal damage, the unique chemical residue. But neither sat right with me. The precision of the sabotage, the way the lab's security systems had been bypassed then reset, suggested a deliberate, external hand. And a motive far more nuanced than simple theft. My fingers danced across the keyboard, navigating through terabytes of data. I'd spent hours sifting through Thorne's personal files, his research drafts, even his digital calendar. Everything was meticulously organized, almost obsessively so. If Thorne was aware of a threat, he wouldn't leave a breadcrumb trail for a casual observer. He would hide it, deep within the layers of his work. I focused on the system's core directories, specifically the ones containing the experimental parameters and outcome logs for Project Chimera, the groundbreaking work that was Thorne's magnum opus. Most files were openly accessible, encrypted only by standard lab protocols. But then I noticed a peculiar cluster of data, masquerading as corrupted system files within a subdirectory labeled archive_legacy_01. The timestamps were recent, too recent for legacy data. And the file sizes fluctuated erratically, almost as if they were alive, changing their digital footprint. A flicker of intuition sparked. This wasn't corruption, it was camouflage. I ran a deeper scan, a specific algorithm designed to identify steganographic encoding. The workstation's fans whirred louder, straining against the complex calculations. Minutes stretched, each second tightening the knot in my stomach. Then, a confirmation, hidden data streams, layered beneath the apparent gibberish. And a strong, proprietary encryption signature. "Got you," I murmured, leaning closer to the screen. The encryption was formidable, a multi-layered beast that took me the better part of an hour to even begin unraveling. It wasn't just a password, it was a series of contextual keys, drawing on specific dates, project code names, and even obscure biological markers related to Thorne's research. It was a lock designed by Thorne, for Thorne, or for someone he trusted implicitly with the deepest secrets of his work. I remembered a small, almost imperceptible scorch mark on the underside of a data chip I'd found near Thorne's hand, a detail dismissed by others as collateral damage. Now, I wondered if it wasn't a physical key, a burned-in sequence. I spent another agonizing 30 minutes, trying various combinations, cross-referencing every scrap of personal and professional information I had on Thorne. Then, a hunch. I typed in the full scientific name of the rare fungus Thorne had used in his early, foundational research, followed by the coordinates of his childhood home, which I'd found tucked away in a scanned photograph on his desktop. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate guess at a deeply personal key. The screen flickered. A green "access granted" message blazed across the monitor. My breath hitched. The files that unfurled were not experimental data. They were personal logs, journal entries almost, heavily interspersed with technical notes. Thorne's voice, though transcribed, was clear, urgent. The implications are terrifying. Project Chimera was meant for advancement, for true therapeutic breakthroughs. But OmniCorp, their clandestine funding for the Phase Gamma initiative isn't for therapy. It's for weaponization. They've twisted my work, distorted its very purpose. My eyes scanned frantically, pulling out keywords. Weaponization. OmniCorp. Phase Gamma. The complexity of the murder method, the elaborate cover-up, suddenly snapped into focus. It wasn't about stealing Thorne's research. It was about silencing him. Preventing the completion of his ethical review, preventing the public release of his findings, preventing him from exposing Omnicorp's true intentions. I've compiled enough evidence, another entry read. The internal communications, the off-book expenditures, the prototypes they're developing in that isolated facility. I can't let this go public under their terms. I have to expose them. They're creating something truly monstrous, something that could destabilize entire regions. My last act must be to ensure that truth surfaces, even if it costs me everything. The tension in the basement thickened, palpable. Thorne hadn't been killed for his research, he'd been killed for his conscience. He wasn't just a brilliant bioengineer, he was a whistleblower, poised to reveal a corporate conspiracy of potentially catastrophic proportions. The accident in the lab wasn't just a murder cover-up, it was a desperate attempt to bury the truth, to frame his death as a tragic misstep or a suicide, discrediting any future revelations. My hand instinctively went to the small digital recorder in my pocket. This changed everything. The stakes had just skyrocketed beyond a simple murder investigation. I was no longer just hunting a killer, I was uncovering a vast, dangerous secret, one that Omnicorp, a corporate giant with seemingly limitless resources, clearly wanted to keep buried. My next step wasn't just about finding evidence, it was about survival. I had to secure this data, and I had to do it without letting anyone, especially Omnicorp, know what I'd found. My fingers danced across the keyboard, the screen illuminating my face with a cool blue light as I parsed through the digital remnants of Aris Thorne's life and death. He wasn't merely a victim of a tragic accident or a desperate act, he was a target. And that meant that accident was a meticulously planned execution, designed to silence him before he could expose Omnicorp's secrets. My task now was to find the hand that pulled the string. I started with the access logs for Thorne's high-security lab. The system was robust, designed to track every entry, every exit, every biometric scan. I cross-referenced the precise window of the incident, the brief, critical period when the sabotage could have been initiated and then masked. The initial sweep, as expected, showed Thorne's own entries, a few maintenance technicians, and the regular security patrol. But I wasn't looking for the obvious. I layered the data, security clearances, specific areas accessed, and the timing down to the second. The saboteur had to possess an intimate understanding of Thorne's unique research setup, the specific vulnerabilities of his system, and the capability to bypass or manipulate sophisticated safeguards. This wasn't a random act, it was surgical. My first filter narrowed the list from dozens to a manageable 16 individuals. These were the only ones with the necessary clearance and a documented reason to be within the facility's secure perimeter during the broad time frame. I pulled up their employee profiles, scrolling through each one, looking for any anomaly, any deviation from the expected. Most were dedicated researchers, lab assistants, or security personnel with spotless records. Then I paused. My eyes snagged on a name, David Thorne. No relation to Aris, the file explicitly stated, but the coincidence of the surname, even a common one, was a faint discord in the meticulous symphony of data. Yet, his access log showed multiple entries into Aris's lab, often late at night, often just before or after Aris himself. I clicked deeper into David Thorne's profile. The initial summary was unremarkable: a corporate manager, experience in project oversight, a clean disciplinary record. But the deeper I went, the more the details began to fray at the edges of that pristine facade. His educational background listed a degree in industrial management, but a subsequent section, almost buried, referenced a specialized training program. It wasn't explicitly stated, but the terminology used, risk mitigation strategies, covert asset protection, intelligence gathering protocols, struck me as odd for a corporate liaison. It sounded more like a resume for a specialized government operative than a business administrator. My brow furrowed. I cross-referenced the training program's title with a secure government database I had access to from a previous case. The results pinged a specific, highly classified division, now defunct, that specialized in intelligence gathering and counterespionage for critical national infrastructure. Covert operations. The pieces began to click into place with an unsettling precision. I dug further, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the tension coiling tighter in my chest. If David Thorne had a background in covert operations, what else was hidden? It took another hour, sifting through archived news articles and obscure legal filings, but I found it. A small, almost forgotten story from nearly a decade ago. A lawsuit. Not against David Thorne directly, but against a shell corporation he was briefly associated with, a company that had been implicated in a high-profile case involving the theft of intellectual property from a rival biotech firm. The case had been settled out of court, sealed, and largely swept under the rug. But the details, even in their redacted form, suggested a sophisticated operation to acquire proprietary research through illicit means. The connection hit me with the force of a physical blow. Stolen intellectual property. Aris Thorne's groundbreaking research was potentially world-changing, incredibly valuable. If Omnicorp was involved in a conspiracy, a scandal involving stolen intellectual property would be a catastrophic blow. David Thorne, the corporate liaison with a background in covert operations and a personal connection to a past IP theft scandal, would be the perfect inside man. He had the access, the technical understanding, and the ruthless expertise to execute a sophisticated sabotage, making it look like an accident. My gaze drifted from the glowing screen to the secured evidence lockers lining the basement wall. Somewhere in those boxes lay the minute traces of the sabotage, the microscopic clues I'd meticulously collected. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly felt less like a drone and more like a rising pressure, pushing me towards the next, inevitable step. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. It was all here, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. The official line I'd let slip to a few carefully chosen ears within the department was that we'd made a significant breakthrough. I'd implied that my team was close to replicating its unique properties, a property Aris himself had only just begun to fully comprehend. The lie was precise, that we were on the verge of isolating the catalyst Aris had used, something that could either revolutionize energy or, in the wrong hands, create something truly devastating. This wasn't about the murder itself, but the consequences of Aris's final project. Only the killer, intimately familiar with Aris's research and its true implications, would understand the urgency of shutting that down. I deliberately left the keycard access log for the main evidence room on my desk, visible to anyone who might accidentally wander past, subtly hinting at a new, critical sample being processed. I hadn't locked the main evidence locker itself with the usual triple redundant system, opting instead for a single, easily circumvented magnetic lock. It was a calculated risk, a direct invitation. The waiting was the hardest part. My jaw ached from the subtle clenching, my eyes scanned the empty corridors, straining to hear anything above the drone of the lights. I'd briefed a uniformed officer, a young man with sharp eyes, to keep a discreet watch on the entrance to the basement. His instructions were simple: if anyone tried to enter the main forensic storage area after hours, let them in, but alert me immediately. No heroics, just observation. It was just past midnight when the call came, a single, clipped word from the officer: movement. I rose slowly, the metal chair scraping against the concrete floor. My pulse quickened, a steady rhythm against my ribs. This was it. I moved silently towards the main storage area, a maze of shelves holding the city's grim history. I could hear the faint click of the magnetic lock giving way, followed by the soft creak of the heavy steel door. Then I stepped into the doorway, flipping on the main overhead lights with a flick of my thumb. The sudden glare illuminated the storage room, revealing a figure hunched over the table where Aris Thorne's samples were laid out. David Thorne froze, his hand hovering over a sealed evidence bag containing a shard of the lab's specialized containment material. His eyes, wide with surprise and a flash of panic, met mine across the sterile space. "Looking for something, David?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the tension coiling in my gut. He straightened slowly, a forced nonchalance attempting to mask his true intent. "Reed. What are you doing here?" "Just checking on the progress. Aris's work, it's important." I heard. Stepping further into the room, closing the door behind me with a soft thud that echoed like a final judgment. "You thought I was close to replicating Aris's catalyst, didn't you? That I might stumble upon the bioweapon potential he was so desperate to expose." David's face tightened. He said nothing, but his gaze darted towards the door, then back to me, assessing his options. "There were none." "The trace polymer, David," I continued, walking to the table, my hand resting near the evidence bag he'd been about to tamper with. "It's unique. A signature. We found it at the site of Aris's lab, coating the ruptured containment unit. And we found it in the residue of the accidents that almost took me out of this investigation, didn't we? The controlled electrical surge in my apartment, the brake line severance on my vehicle. All of them designed to look like unfortunate mishaps, just like Aris's accident. I pulled a small, sealed vial from my pocket. Inside, a microscopic fleck shimmered under the harsh light. "This is from the brake line. Matches the sample from Aris's lab, a precise molecular match. It's a specialized polymer, a byproduct of the very process Aris was developing." His shoulders slumped, and he finally looked away, his gaze fixed on the concrete floor. "Not the whole company, but a specific faction. They were twisting Aris's research, his energy breakthroughs, into something horrific. A bioweapon. He found out, he threatened to go public. They couldn't let that happen." He looked up, his eyes pleading, yet resigned. "They tasked me. A lab explosion, something he was known for being reckless with. I knew the lab, I knew his habits. I planted the charges, used the polymer to ensure the explosion was contained, but violent enough to destroy the evidence. I thought I'd erased everything. When you started digging, when you got close, you would have found the evidence he'd hidden within the polymer's structure itself." My own breath hitched, a shallow, involuntary gasp, as the last of the uniformed officers escorted David Thorne, his face a mask of shock and betrayal, up the stairwell. The clang of the security door above echoed the finality of the moment, yet for me, it only underscored the beginning of something far larger, far uglier. I stood amidst the sterile chaos of my workspace, the illuminated microscope still focused on a sliver of scorched fabric, the evidence that had finally broken the man. The hum of the ventilation system was a low thrum against my ears, a constant reminder of the methodical work that had led to this point. David Thorne, brilliant in his own right, had been too clever by half, too confident that his intimate knowledge of Aris's lab and research would provide the perfect cover. He'd orchestrated a catastrophic accident, a calculated destruction designed to obliterate not just a life, but a legacy. My gaze drifted to the row of labeled samples, each vial a testament to the meticulous undoing of his perfect crime, the specific residue on the ventilation grate, the unusual scorch pattern on the floor tiles that defied a simple energy surge, the microscopic traces of a unique accelerant. Each piece, insignificant on its own, had woven into an undeniable tapestry of murder. A colleague, the lead investigator on the ground, descended the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the concrete. He didn't speak immediately, simply walked to the adjacent workbench, leaning against it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the city. "He cracked," the colleague said, his voice low, almost a whisper against the hum. "Admitted to the primary act. Said he wanted control of the research, that Aris was too reckless, too close to a breakthrough that would destabilize everything." I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the microscope, though I saw nothing but the implications. Reckless. Simply not willing to sell it to the highest bidder without ethical safeguards, I countered, the words tasting bitter. He knew the lab's weaknesses, its redundancies. He knew exactly how to make it look like a tragic miscalculation. The colleague pushed a hand through his already disheveled hair. Omnicorp is in freefall. We've already got warrants out for 3 more senior executives. The corporate council is singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. This wasn't just David Thorne acting alone, was it? No, I confirmed, finally looking away from the microscope, a harsh light leaving an afterimage on my retina. He was the trigger, but the architects. They're still out there, or at least their influence is. This goes beyond one man's greed. This is about control, about power, about silencing anything that threatens the established order, especially when it promises to disrupt their bottom line. The news broke like a dam, a torrent of revelations flooding every screen, every headline. My phone, usually quiet, vibrated incessantly with calls from reporters, though I ignored them all. The initial narrative of a brilliant scientist's tragic accident was shredded, replaced by a sprawling tale of corporate espionage, internal power struggles, and murder. Omnicorp, once an untouchable titan, was now a symbol of unchecked ambition and corruption. High-profile arrests followed swiftly, a domino effect triggered by David Thorne's confession and the irrefutable evidence we had compiled. Public outcry was immediate and fierce. The scientific community was aghast, furious at the perversion of research and the silencing of a visionary. The ethical debate surrounding Aris Thorne's work, once confined to academic journals, exploded into mainstream consciousness. Was humanity ready for such advancements? Who should control them? The very questions Aris had grappled with in solitude were now shouted from every news channel. Governments, international organizations, rival corporations, they all began to circle, vying for control of the remnants of Aris's research. The data, the prototypes, the intellectual property, it was a prize too significant to ignore, a potential world changer now tainted by blood. I watched a snippet on a colleague's tablet, a commentator's grave face detailing the intricate web of deceit. It was a cold satisfaction, knowing my work had brought this truth to light, but also a profound weariness. The quiet pursuit of evidence, the methodical unraveling of a lie, had unleashed a storm. The colleague sighed again, pushing off the workbench. "You did good, Reed. You brought him down." "One of them," I corrected, my gaze sweeping over the sterile instruments, the silent samples. The immediate threat, David Thorne, was contained. But the wider implications, the true architects of this tragedy, were still out there. And the future of Aris Thorne's legacy, a legacy that promised to reshape the very fabric of existence, remained precariously balanced, teetering on the edge of a global power struggle. That was just beginning. It was a low, persistent thrum, a sound I'd come to associate with the quiet, methodical unpacking of truth. Rows of evidence lockers, each sealed and tagged, stretched into the dim distance, a silent testament to countless investigations, resolved and unresolved. I stood before locker 7B. Specifically, the one containing the remnants of Aris Thorne's world. The shattered glass of the containment unit, meticulously recovered and catalogued. The scorched fragments of his lab coat. The modified access card, still bearing the faint imprint of David Thorne's thumb. Each item a piece of a gruesome puzzle, now fully assembled. David Thorne, the brother, was contained. His confession, a bitter torrent of resentment and intellectual jealousy, had been chillingly clear. He hadn't just wanted to control his brother's research, he'd wanted to be his brother, to usurp the legacy. The catastrophic lab accident had been a meticulously staged act, designed to erase Aris Thorne and simultaneously secure control over his groundbreaking work. The microscopic trace I'd found, the unusual burn pattern, they weren't anomalies, they were carefully placed misdirections, almost mocking in their subtlety. He'd known the lab intimately, known the protocols, known the blind spots. He'd even anticipated the initial findings of suicide or miscalculation, banking on the inherent chaos of the event to obscure his tracks. But chaos, I'd learned, always leaves its own unique signature. Aris Thorne's research, the bioengineering marvel that promised to revolutionize genetic repair, had become the instrument of his demise. A tool of immense potential, twisted into a weapon by greed and envy. It made me wonder, not for the first time, about the true cost of progress. How many brilliant minds would be sacrificed on the altar of ambition? How many world-changing discoveries would be perverted by those who sought only power? The ethical implications of Thorne's work weighed heavily on me. The potential to cure devastating diseases, to extend life, to alter the very fabric of human existence. And yet, in the hands of someone like his brother, that same research could have been a tool for unprecedented control, for creating a new form of biological tyranny. This case had taken its toll. The long hours, the relentless scrutiny of minute details, the constant immersion in the aftermath of violence. Each case chipped away a small piece of something inside me, replacing it with a harder, more cynical layer. I felt it now, a dull ache behind my eyes, a weariness that went deeper than sleep could fix. But then, I looked at the locker again. At the meticulous labels, the organized evidence. At the quiet certainty that justice, however slow or painful, had been served. That Aris Thorne, despite the horrific end to his life, would not be forgotten as a victim of a mere accident. His death would stand as a testament to a deliberate, calculated act, and his brother would answer for it. That was the purpose. That was why I did what I did. My commitment to forensic justice, to the unwavering pursuit of truth through evidence, felt not diminished, but sharpened by the ordeal. It was a heavy mantle, but one I wore with a renewed sense of grim determination. The case was closed. The paperwork filed, the evidence secured for trial. The legal system would now take its course, a different kind of meticulous dissection, but one built upon the foundation I had laid. Aris Thorne's legacy, for better or worse, would forever be intertwined with his final, fatal project. The world might never fully grasp the true scope of what he was on the verge of achieving, or the depths of the depravity that sought to steal it, but I knew. And that, in its own quiet way, felt like a victory. I turned from the locker, my gaze sweeping across the rows of silent evidence. The thrum of the dehumidifiers seemed to deepen, a low, expectant hum. The struggle between progress and peril, between creation and destruction, was an ancient one. It played out in every lab, every innovation, every human heart. And it was far from over. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message. A new case number. A new set of coordinates for a crime scene. The details were sparse, just a preliminary report of an unusual incident at an abandoned factory on the city's industrial fringe. My jaw tightened. The world kept spinning, and with it, the endless cycle of human endeavor and human failing. I had a feeling the quiet hum of the basement wasn't going to be the only constant in my life for much longer.